Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into something that I think is pretty relevant to, well, all of us, really, especially those of us who, spend any amount of time online. We're talking about social media and how it interacts with our attention spans.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we all kind of feel, right? That pull towards our phones, the constant urge to scroll. But for this deep dive, we're really going to try to get beneath the surface of that.
Exactly. So, to guide us, we've got this article called The Shrinking Attention Spans and the Social Media Machine.
Right. And it takes a look at how these platforms are designed and the potential effects on our ability to focus and think deeply.
So, no, just like, surface level stuff. We're going deep. We really want to unpack the mechanics of it all.
Yeah.
How is social media's design maybe subtly shaping your focus every single day?
Yeah. And we'll try to do it without getting too bogged down in all the technical jargon.
For sure. So, right off the bat, the article makes this pretty strong statement. It's not just about wasting time on social media, There's something more deliberate going on with how these platforms grab and hold our attention.
Right. And what's so interesting is how platforms like Instagram and YouTube, they've actually built environments that tap right into our brain's reward system.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, it's all about dopamine. Think about it. The endless scroll, the constant stream of new content, all those short, quick videos. It's like a constant stream of little rewards.
I see. Like you never know what's coming next, right?
Yeah.
Could be a funny video, a beautiful image, who knows?
Exactly. It's that unpredictability that acts like a variable reward schedule, kind of like, slot machines. Keeps us hooked, keeps us wanting more.
So are you saying our brains are being, trained to expect this constant novelty, this instant gratification?
In a way, yeah. And the article makes it very clear that this isn't some accident. It's a calculated strategy by these tech companies.
Wow. So they're not just, throwing features out there to see what sticks. There's a real understanding of psychology at play.
Exactly. And the big picture consequence of this, I think, is a real difficulty in maintaining deep focus. When your brain is constantly getting these quick hits of pleasure, it becomes harder to settle into things that demand more, sustained attention.
Right. It's like we're always snacking, and then when it comes time for a real meal, we're just not hungry.
That's a good analogy.
So then we get into this cycle, right? Because it's not just the content itself. We also have these notifications constantly popping up, vying for our attention, pulling us away from whatever we're trying to focus on.
Oh, absolutely. And the article really highlights how every moment we spend online, every interaction, it all generates data. And this data is being used by these companies to actually, in the article's words, manipulate our behavior.
Manipulate is a strong word. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, if we think about it, their business model kind of relies on it. More distraction equals more time on the platform, which means more opportunities to show us targeted ads and collect even more data about us. More data, more profit.
Right. It's all about keeping us on the platform for as long as possible.
Exactly. And a key part of that is the algorithms they use. These are essentially sets of rules that decide what content you see, based on what you've done before, what other people are doing.
So it's not just about showing you things you like, it's about showing you things that will keep you engaged, keep you scrolling.
Right, it's about keeping you on the hook. And then the article goes on to talk about how this constant exposure to bite-sized content is actually changing our brains.
Oh, interesting. In what way?
Well, it's like we're being trained to expect this rapid-fire stimulation, and that can make it harder to, have patience for anything that requires more stick-to-itiveness.
So like reading a long article or having a deep conversation, these things start to feel like harder.
Yeah, and this is where I think it's important to ask ourselves, have we noticed this in our own lives? Do we find ourselves getting restless or bored more easily when we're trying to focus on something complex?
That's a good question. I know I've definitely caught myself feeling that way sometimes.
Right. And the article suggests that our brains are just getting used to that quick stimulation and losing our ability to focus for longer periods. Like our mental muscles for concentration are getting weaker.
It's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah, it is a bit. And it's not just when we're actively on our phones either. The article talks about how our minds can stay in that hyper-stimulated state even when we're not scrolling.
So even when we put the phone down, our brains are still kind of buzzing, expecting the next notification, the next update.
Exactly. We're always kind of on edge, waiting for that next hit of stimulation. And that can make it really hard to just be present, to focus on the task at hand, to really engage in mindful activities.
Right. It's like we're always half present, half thinking about what we might be missing online.
Yeah, and that can have some pretty significant consequences for things like creativity, problem solving, even genuine human connection.
Because if we're always distracted, we can't really delve deeply into anything, right?
Exactly. It's hard to be creative or solve complex problems when your mind is constantly jumping from one thing to the next.
And it's hard to truly connect with someone when you're only half listening to them.
Exactly. And the article doesn't shy away from looking at this from the perspective of the tech companies themselves. It states pretty clearly that they're aware of the addictive nature of their platforms and how they can impact our attention spans.
So they know what they're doing.
It seems that way. And that brings up a potential conflict, right? Because their goal isn't necessarily to improve our well-being or help us focus better. Their goal is to keep us engaged, to keep us on their platforms for as long as possible.
And they do that through features like what? Infinite scrolling, notifications, personalized recommendations.
Exactly. The very things that keep us hooked are the things that might be contributing to this erosion of our focus.
It's a bit of a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's important to understand how these mechanisms actually work. For example, the article talks about how the constant flood of information and notifications leads to more multitasking.
Oh, right. And multitasking doesn't actually mean getting more done, does it? It usually just means doing a bunch of things poorly.
Exactly. It really fragments our attention. We're constantly switching gears, and that takes a toll on our cognitive abilities.
We're just not wired to be doing a million things at once, are we?
Not effectively, no. And then there's the whole FOMO thing.
Yes. The fear of missing out.
Wrong.
That feeling that everyone else is doing something amazing while we're just sitting here.
Right. And that drives us to constantly check social media, which further disrupts our focus.
It's like a constant tug of war for our attention.
Yeah. And then we have the rise of short-form content like TikTok and Instagram Reels, which, while entertaining, deliver those quick dopamine hits we talked about earlier, potentially making it harder to engage with more complex, nuanced content.
Right. It's all about instant gratification, instant entertainment.
Exactly. And some studies are actually suggesting that this can have real, measurable effects on our cognitive abilities.
Like actual changes in our brains.
Well, there's evidence to suggest that excessive social media use and multitasking can negatively impact our memory and our ability to focus for extended periods.
Wow. That's pretty sobering.
Yeah.
So, to sum it all up, this deep dive into the shrinking attention spans and the social media machine shows us that the design of these platforms isn't some neutral thing. It's intentionally crafted to keep us engaged, even if that means potentially diminishing our attention spans and creating a craving for instant gratification.
And the tech companies, it seems, are very aware of this.
Yeah. So it really comes down to us as individuals to be aware of these dynamics and to make conscious choices about how we use these platforms.
Exactly. And that brings us to the central question posed by the article, a question I think we all need to ask ourselves. As attention spans shrink, how much of your attention are you willing to give away before you realize what you've lost?
That's a powerful thought, and it's a good place to leave things for our listeners to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.